now let's gonna switch into English for a second. We're gonna move a little bit to the north of Europe, from Switzerland to Denmark. We're gonna link with Thomas Kolster, our first keynote speaker. Thomas, Mr. Goodvertising. Let's gonna have a look on Thomas. Okay, now we're gonna move to our first keynote speakers, Thomas Kolster. Hello, Thomas. Good to have you in Poland, in Warsaw, virtually, straight from the north of Europe. I hope it's not as freezing as all these images that we had on Mark Dickens posters. I hope you're well. Your presentation is going to be about purpose and the death of purpose. As BlackRock's CEO said last year, purpose is the only way that brands can survive. Profit is not enough. Now you say the purpose is dead. How come?
Thank you so much, Radek. And yes, calling in here from Copenhagen, so we're really bringing people on a bit of an exploration. I'm not in a bathtub, so I guess that's great. Yes, I think for sure purpose has been evolving incredibly since my first book came out, Goodvertising, about a decade ago, so lots have happened. And I think, obviously, I should be extremely happy about the progress that we're seeing, but as probably a lot of you in the audience witness again and again, is that there's lots of criticisms, there's lots of mistakes. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is what I call the hero trap, where you put yourself up on this pedestal. So obviously, I'm going to bring you on that journey. And also, before I start, I want to congratulate Mark Dickens and his colleagues on the incredible work that's been done here during the pandemic. These are extremely challenging times, and I hope all of you are staying safe at home as well. So obviously, this is no time to stay quiet as a brand. This is no time to stay quiet as a leader, but this is really about how to get the balance right. Because most of the time when we talk about purpose ends up a little bit like Pokemon. Everybody is searching for it, but nobody really knows why. So hopefully I can shine a little bit of light on that today. So as I mentioned, about a decade ago or so, I wrote a book called Goodvertising, and in fact, this is interesting because at the time I was running a traditional advertising agency, but this was in the back of the financial crisis. So at the time, I had a lot of time to sit down and contemplate about how I could bring my business forward. And I would also encourage all of you out there to use this time to rethink your brands, to rethink your offerings. And the thing that really sparked my journey in a more conscious direction was the financial crisis, but also the fact that we had the climate summit in Copenhagen, the COP15. We had all the big government leaders. We had Tony Blair, we had Obama, and obviously not a lot happened, not a lot came out of that meeting. So this was where I thought, wait, hold on. What if brands, what if companies could stand up and serve society and could push for sustainable change? That was the very early foundation. And as you can see on that picture, this was quite a while ago. That was a young Thomas, but quite a bit have happened since then. Because if I look today at purpose, if I look today at all the communication that's coming out from companies, it looks a little bit like this. So brands being incredibly busy, sharing all the good stuff they're doing. And that just doesn't look very good. You know, quite often, you know, you hear things like, you know, our marketing campaign obviously reflects our company's belief that we should talk to young people about climate. But most of the time, it's just really to sell more soft drinks. So how to strike that balance, how to strike that real balance between profit and purpose is becoming increasingly difficult. Because to be fair, if you go down to average supermarket today, most of the products on those shelves will actually claim to have that higher purpose or somehow to do some good, either for society or for the environment. And in this space, most people obviously look to purposeful companies like Patagonia and others. And I did as well. I mean, I got to admit that when I wrote my book about a decade ago, Goodvertising, I feel in a way that I did the course a disservice. Maybe at the time it was right, but when everybody's rushing into this space, a new approach is needed. And so often you can't have a sustainability or purpose presentation without having to talk about Patagonia. So let's look at what Patagonia is actually saying when it comes to purpose. We're in the business to save our home planet. That is their purpose, and that is something that probably a lot of you out there is a purpose that probably will resonate with you. But actually, if you listen to that purpose, genuinely, you're putting yourself up on a pedestal and you're saying, as a brand, as a company, as a leader, we're in the business to save our home planet. To me, that does sound a little bit crazy, a little bit megalomaniac, that you think that you as a brand are the ones that's out here to save all of us. And when you put yourself up there, it's very easy to criticize, and it's very easy for you to fall down like a can of soup. So I think a new approach really is needed, because the one picture we don't want to portray is really placing the brand at the very core, something like this, saying, we're in charge, we're going to fix the world. Because as I've studied the last decade or so, the more companies have been talking about doing good, the more all of us have adopted things like the Sustainable Development Goals, and started to talk to consumers about things like plastic-free packaging, etc. It doesn't really seem that we're so successful at really succeeding with the change that's needed. So if you look at this next graph, it does seem like the more we talk about our world bettering promises, the less it does seem like people are believing us. And there's tons of studies to actually support this claim. One is from Deloitte, so they've been doing a study among millennials, and from 17 to 18, it went from 50% to 66% of young people that today believe that us brands and this call are only dealing with business, dealing with purpose to earn more money. So somehow we're not succeeding very well. Secondly, I think a very important part of this is also how do we create the change needed at scale. So here's another fact for you on this next slide. The thing is that 60% of people actually say they want to buy from purposeful brands. And I know there's going to be somebody from Havas a bit later, probably sharing some of the newer numbers of this. These are global numbers. But only 26% of people actually follow through. So there's a gap of 39% of people who doesn't act. They say they want to do something, but they don't do it. So I'm extremely curious about how can we bridge that purpose gap? How can we move people from inaction to action and actually really create a driver for our purpose? And as you might know, this is a possibility for you to answer questions along this little call. And I'll really encourage you to answer this one question that you can do on the app. So think about your company's purpose, really. And do you feel today that people are acting on your purpose, that people are living on your purpose? And there's obviously three answers that you can give to this question in the app. One is yes, very much. People feel extremely engaged. Our customers are acting on it. Secondly, yeah, averagely, so, not a lot. Or answer three, which is no, this is not very visible. So obviously use this opportunity to answer that question on are people acting and living on your purpose? Because this is fundamentally the thing that I'm extremely curious about, how we bridge this purpose gap. But maybe it's not so strange that there is this gap between what we say and what we do. I'm certain that a lot of you recognize that each year around when we come to a new year and we put out these New Year's pledges. And most of the time, a New Year pledge often just ends up being a new beginning to those big, bad, old habits. And I can definitely sign on to that. I think each and every New Year, I promise, yes, I'll go for that little run. You know, I'll probably waste it, you know, lose a few pounds. But, you know, a couple of weeks into January, the sneakers are still lying there in the corridor. And I'm sure that you can recognize that. So for me, we need to ask different questions. But because for too long, we have been asking one big question, which is why? Why do we as a brand, as an organization, as a leader exist in this world? And I don't think this exercise is very helpful. As soon as you go down to the supermarket and everybody is screaming purpose, 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 who really to believe? I really don't think it's about pitching yourself as a brand and as a leader, as the hero, but really how can you enable people to live those better lives and motivate them to bridge that gap? So there's one central question I feel leaders and organizations today need to ask, and that is, who can you help people become? Because in so many ways, when we look at it, economists have made us believe that we are just motivated by money and status, but that is basically false. Most of us are actually self-motivating. We do things because we love doing them. You know, and I think that is especially true for the advertising world as well, that we can burn the midnight oil just to come with a great idea for the next marketing campaign. So let me share you one example of a company that gets this. And this is actually an example from my backyard. And this was actually a thing that personally I felt that I wanted to cut down on eating meat, and I wanted to embrace a more plant-based diet. So there was this company called Årstiderne, which basically means seasons in Danish. So they do these, and I'm sure that some of you can recognize that as well. They do these boxes of farm fresh produce that's being delivered to your doorstep. But it also does come with a recipe that will teach me how to create either vegan or a vegetarian food. So in that way, they are helping me on that journey. And I was interviewing for the book the CEO, Søren Eilersen, and he really talked about purpose in a different way, because he talked about what he called earth connection. So this idea that it was a journey of self-discovery, that each and one of us had to find that connection with the produce, with the vegetables, and with the earth. And he shared this workshops in the bigger cities in Denmark where people had to harvest beetroot, and for the very first time when harvesting beetroot saw their hands being colored red. And this is probably for the people out there that have green fingers, this is probably something that you can recognize as well. So they are helping their customers on their journey. And so for the most of the time, obviously, you know, when I do my little vegan pie, most of the time I'm successful, and the result comes out a little bit like this next slide, you know, and I have a happy girlfriend, and we are enjoying my new plant-based dining skills. But obviously, quite often, to be honest, the result maybe ends up something a little bit more like this next slide. And I think this is generally the thing about change, that change is a journey, and having the conversations with leaders and having the conversations with these brands, taking an approach where you step down from the purpose pedestal and rather trying to enable people to live better lives, that's extremely hard to criticize because you are on this journey together. So I think if you want to build purposeful organizations, meaningful organizations, I've created a tool that I call the arrow. And the arrow is inspired by psychotherapy and inspired by coaching, because both those disciplines are goal-oriented, moving you from inaction to action. And the arrow looks like this, and ask 4 fundamental questions to the big route, to that big one question: who can you help people become? And I know it can be a little bit probably difficult to read on the screen. The first 2 questions shouldn't come as a surprise. I mean, the first one is, what is it that you do? That might be the running shoes, that might be laptops, or whatever it is. That might not always be a constant. I mean, we've seen Apple suddenly moving from doing laptops to moving into iTunes, to iMovies, etc. The second one is how. So how is it that you are unique in delivering your service or product? So that are the typical kind of USPs that we're used to working with. The third question, even more important when you want to create a meaningful brand, is who can you help people become? So understanding the role that you can play in people's lives. And I think this is pivotal when we talk about purpose, because most of the time when I looked at the Fortune 500 companies, they came out with statements like, we want to do good for people and planet, rather than understanding my journey, my goals, my values as a customer. So quite often I have seen this disconnect, which makes it extremely difficult as a leader and as a brand to get the meaningful results that purpose can deliver. The fourth question is when. So when can you enable this change? So this model is really strictly focused on moving people towards the goals that they see. And this is really an evolution of the market. So if you look at how this has actually evolved on this next slide, it's on the one axis you have obviously the brand promise. On the lower axis you have value for the customer. And for those of you who are very well trodden in the marketing lingo, the first one is obviously the typical functional benefits. So a faster car. The second one is the emotional benefits. So this was where, we had the emotional selling propositions when we started talking about dressing brands as characters. So for example, the BMWs, who feel more masculine when driving a BMW. The third one is the societal difference. And this was where my last book, Goodvertising, actually stopped. It was talking about the societal difference. So for example, the Prius, a more environmentally friendly car. But the fourth level that I think we are heading towards, a post-purpose area, an area where people are demanding control, is really to give people what I call a transformational difference. So an outcome that can be felt in their daily lives. So the outcome of this arrow process is what I call a transformational promise, because by the end of the day, it's about promising your customers, your employees, a meaningful difference that you can help them do and provide in their lives. And if we compare the two approaches for two company cases, the one I mentioned earlier was obviously Patagonia, claiming we are in the business to save our home planet. Obviously, I'm not criticizing Patagonia, but Patagonia is a legacy brand. It's incredibly dangerous to copy that approach. I'm certain that most of you out there, and sad to say, are not legacy brands. And if you put yourself on that pedestal, you will be criticized. But if you compare that to what another Danish company is saying, Lego, they talk about a who approach. Who can you help people become? And they answer that by saying, we want to inspire and develop the builders of tomorrow. And I'm sure for those of you who are parents out there, or for those of you who have played with Lego when you were kids, you can definitely feel how they play that significant role in your life, how you feel more creative, how it sparks those playing skills. And I can give you another case of what I would say is a company that delivers a transformational difference. And that company is a health insurance company called Discovery. I'm not sure if you have Discovery in Poland, but basically it is a health insurance company that started out in South Africa that is now in 7 markets. And the transformational promise from Discovery is really to incentivize people to live healthier lives, to incentivize people to live healthier lives. And if you listen to those two approaches, you know, we're in the business to save our home planet, or a company that are there as a coach, as a helper, holding your hand to push you towards the goals that you want in your life. And they've been incredibly successful in creating this change. They've created a program that kind of looks a little bit like a typical reward program that is called Discovery Vitality. And basically what they do is that when you go down in the supermarket and you buy fruits and vegetables, you are being rewarded. Or when you go to the gym, you are being rewarded. So basically each healthy behavior you do are being supported, and you're being motivated by Discovery to do that. And they've done a big health survey across 7 markets, 200,000 people, and they have actually proven that the people who take part in the Discovery Vitality program actually do exercise 5.2 days more per month, which obviously translates to a lot of healthier living. And for the company, the business case for this approach, the business case for purpose is pretty clear, as less health payouts obviously make it a much more healthy business. But obviously in writing this book, I wanted obviously to investigate this even further and trying to understand this difference between the purposeful approach. This is what we do as a company, compared to the transformational approach. This is what we can enable you to do as a customer. So I did a survey comparing 4 purposeful campaigns with 4 transformational campaigns. And some of these campaigns you might have seen. The first one in the purposeful category was Budweiser, and this was an ad that they ran during the Super Bowl in the US, as you know, the world's most expensive commercial break in the world. So these commercials have obviously been tested from head to tail, and I wanted to compare that, and obviously the statement of this commercial is, this Bud is for better tomorrow. And obviously Budweiser wanted to talk about how today their beers are brewed either with renewable energy, or how they offset the carbon emissions from that brewing process. And let's compare that to what I call a transformational campaign. So this is a campaign that is pretty well known in the world of advertising, the campaign from Procter & Gamble's Always brand. And the campaign idea was to change how these young, vulnerable women feel at a very critical stage at their lives, and wanting to empower these young women and changing the real notion of the sentence "like a girl" from one of criticism, of weakness, you run like a girl, to one of strength and empowerment. And they actually did succeed changing how people perceived that one sentence. But, you know, we can't have a presentation without statistics. So I want to show you the outcome of that survey and that study we did comparing those 2 approaches. And as you can see, the 4 first ones with the little underline underneath are the transformational ones. The one without the underline are the purposeful campaigns. And we measured it on 3 parameters: brand warmth, so how did people like the message? Did they feel it appealed to them? Secondly, competence. Thirdly, obviously, did they feel motivated by this commercial? The interesting thing was that even though the company doesn't talk about itself doing the transformational approach, but talks about the role that it plays in people's lives, competence is on par no matter what. So competence is not falling, even though the company is not touting its own efforts like we saw with Budweiser. But the surprise really does happen when we look at motivation, because I can see there's a significant drop between 32 and 39% in how motivated people feel by a conventional, purposeful approach. So obviously, when you take a transformational approach, when you're there to motivate people, there are 32 to 39% more chance that people feel encouraged to act on your message. And again, going back to the business case of all of this, obviously I wanted to investigate, are people also willing to pay more for this approach? So when we look at this next study where we looked at people's willingness to pay a premium price, there was quite a surprising finding again, and these are, I think, between 28 and 30% that people wanted to pay more for these campaigns that took a transformational approach. So when your starting point as a brand and as a leader is to grow people, you actually also pivot and push people, or when you decide to grow people, you also grow your bottom line, so people feel much more motivated. So this is one way to bridge the gap, but that's not the only reason, because I mean, when I started in advertising, we had radio, print, TV, that was it. But we have to acknowledge that today a mass marketing approach is not what cuts it in the market today, because we have to admit that we are not so much in control anymore as marketeers. This guy's in control. We are all in control. The massive amount of social media updates, the way that young people today want to control everything by the click of a button. I mean, the young generation are not just sitting around and waiting for you to come up with your next innovative product idea. And they're not really to blame, because if you think about it, their generation, the only thing that they have seen from big companies has actually been environmental degradation and social injustice. So it's not strange that these young people, millennials and Gen Z, are skeptical towards all of these efforts, and especially when most of this, when these activities in this space is just screaming, we do good, we care a lot, we want to save sea turtles. So this generation is more and more becoming do good deaf. But there's also an interesting part of this, and this is the fact that, in fact, we are seeing young people wanting to play a much more significant role. And this is a study that Edelman did, where young people actually today don't look to brands, don't look to companies to create the change, but they actually look at themselves as the agents of change. And I think this is becoming more and more visible across the whole marketing mix, from products to campaigning. And it does really make sense if you think about it, because we don't just want to sit there as a passive target group. We are, and you've got to respect people for their intellect. You've got to respect people for wanting to take part. There's nothing worse than having a leader or brand coming to you, talking at you. We want to participate. And let me share you one campaign that's been extremely successful in doing this and in answering that one big question: who can you help people become? And that is a outdoor sports retailer out of the US, and some of you might know it, and it's called REI. They're actually also a cooperative. So on Black Friday, obviously this day supporting consumption, and in so many ways overconsumption, I would claim, they thought, what meaningful role could they play in their customers' lives? And the one answer they found was asking their customers who already love the outdoor to go outside, opt outside. And they created this campaign where everybody could participate and share how they, on this big shopping day, didn't want to take part in this, but rather wanted to go out and enjoy all that the great outdoors in the US had to offer. And if we look at the results of this, it's actually pretty incredible, because from 2015 to 2018, they have enrolled more than from 1.4 million people to 15 million people, and lots of organizations have opted in and taking part. And one of the things that me and the research team did was actually going on and checking the visitor numbers in the U.S. state parks, and actually now it's the second most visited day in the U.S. state parks, and that's quite incredible when you think about that was not a day that existed just a couple of years ago. So really finding this role, meaningful role you can play in people's lives, does motivate people to change. And this is actually something that I can recognize. As soon as I go into a big city like New York, the first thing I want to do is actually go into Central Park and just have a bit of greenery and an ability to breathe a bit of fresh air. And this also applies to how you think your marketing efforts, because people are open to engage if you want to make them engage. So one example from Lego is actually how they have turned to their builders, to the people who love their products, and actually asked them, why don't you come up with amazing products? So they created this platform that they call Ideas, and if the Lego thing you have done get more than 10,000 votes, it's actually put into production, and actually some of the revenues are actually shared with you. So I really do think that you have to ask yourself as a marketeer, how can you open up more of your marketing mix for people's engagements? And I gotta say, and I don't know how many of you have played with Lego, but if it was me when I was 12-year-old little Thomas with a big curly hair, I would absolutely have loved it if one of my Lego models actually made it into the usual Lego product portfolio. And as I said, this is important because we are in fact self-motivated, and this is really the insight behind one of the most successful business models in the history. Because if you really do think about the IKEA concept, isn't it mad that people voluntarily want to spend time on putting together one of the most popular bookshelves, the Billy bookshelf, because most of us basically have money enough to buy it. The one thing we're lacking is time, and yet we still want to engage with the IKEA brand. And why is that? And I got to be the first to admit, as a Scandinavian guy, the idea about masculinity is definitely threatened. So for me, this is a real opportunity for me to show my girlfriend that I can actually put this little wonder of a bookshelf together. I don't have 10 fingers in each hand. I am a little bit of a handy guy. So this is a way to engage me in putting this little beautiful product together. And I gotta admit, and as I'm sure that some of you have experienced that as well, that when we fail putting together that IKEA bookshelf, we do obviously also risk the relationship. So for me, this is about time that we take people seriously, that we take people's craving for self-actualization seriously. And this is specifically very interesting in a time where most of us have to deal with thinking about how we can look at consumption in a new way. And I will argue that people don't any longer buy what it is you make, the product or the service, because that can be bought cheaply. Most people can afford everything today. But what essentially have value today, and especially for young people, is actually showcasing their own effort. So no value in buying an expensive cap with some logo on it. You rather want to showcase how you have played a part in the shaping of that product. And you can probably see that on social media each and every day when people today go to Tuscany and they go to visit this wine farm and they make their own pasta. So it's really about for you to figure out how you can make people participate across that marketing mix. And that opens up a new exciting possibility for brands, because you don't have to sell stuff. You have to figure out that meaningful role you can play, like Årstiderne helping me to create more plant-based recipes. So really asking yourself that role and inspire people, because I think one thing that has been really incredibly interesting in this pandemic has been people's urge to try out new things. I have seen friends who started playing the piano. I have seen people practicing and going out and doing a little garden on the balcony. And I think this is really what shapes as all of us as human beings. And I do believe that the foundation and the building blocks of great long-lasting brands are really to find that little human insight, that little that little role that you play in people's lives. And one of the brands that have been successful in pivoting their business model away from just selling products is a US sports retailer called Respect Your Universe, and they actually want to motivate people to do sports no matter the goals in life. And each one of their stores don't only have your typical store environment where you could buy the products, but they actually have a gym. And if some of you out there, let's say you are passionate about boxing or you're passionate about yoga, then you can actually borrow this space from Respect Your Universe, and you could be hosting a class in their space and teach fellow citizens in the community more about your skills. So really thinking about how you can pivot your business models from plugging products. And this is also a new way of looking at leadership, because leadership used to be something where you'd have a white male guy saying we've got to go in this direction and this is what we as a company believe in. Today, leaders need to work in a different way, and I see that every day in the agency. You have to ask your customers, you have to ask your employees, what are your dreams, what are your goals, what are your aspirations, and how can I help you achieve that? And we see that in some of the biggest movements that are happening out there at the moment. If you look to the Me Too movement, they don't have this typical physical leadership. Each and every one of us can understand how we see Me Too apply to us. And even if you see it something as Greta Thunberg and how she has motivated young people all over the world to take part in what is today one of the biggest environmental movements. So there's really no bigger accomplishment for brands to push and help people towards those motives. And when I see some of the outcomes of that, these 3 girls that have taken part in the Opt Outside campaign from I look at their smiles on their face. So this is not just a claim where you say we are so and so sustainable, or where you launch a product that is 30% more plant-based. This is an outcome that people can feel on their own minds and bodies. Or for example, like this little social media update from a mom that talks about how her daughter has teased her dad and older brother that if they ran like a girl, they would probably run a little bit faster. So don't pitch yourself as the heroes anymore. It's incredibly important that you turn your customers into the heroes, because by the end of the day, I think no organization, no leader is greater what they can make people achieve. And this is really where the nail the hammer needs to hit the nail, because we are at a great turning point today. if you look at the change that needs to happen, and if you look at if you want to motivate brands to bridge that gap of 39% between inaction to action, because the fact is that we are faced with an unprecedented social and environmental challenge, as this sad picture shows across so many things. Our ecosystems degrading. So we are the one generation of leaders, of brands, and as citizens that has to act and that has to create change. And this all rests on us to create that needed change. So I believe that if we want to change the world, that change really needs to begin with each and every one of us out there. So that is really my core message to you, and the challenge that rests in your hand. There is, the brands that we represent in the world of marketing are threatened as never before. We have a big task ahead as navigating at building sustainable and purposeful brands in the right way. And for me, it's really avoiding the hero trap and building meaningful brands by asking this one pivotal question: who can you help people become? So that was a little bit of what I had to share with you here today around purpose and brand activism. And if you have any questions, I'm more than happy to jump onto those as well. So thank you so much.